Reconstruction and Development Perspective on Electric Mobility. 지금 현재 유로피안 뱅크에서 프린시플로 근무하고 있는 타일리 트리그를 통해서 이 발표를 듣도록 하겠습니다.
Yes, good morning everyone from London. I'm Tali Trigg with EBRD, and good afternoon to you. Mr. Kim, it says host has disabled sharing, so I can't share. Could you change that maybe?
Just a moment.
Sure.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, I'll just say next slide then. So I'm just open there like this. Okay, perfect. I can't see everyone who's there, but again, good morning from London. My name is Tali Trigg. I work at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or EBRD. As the previous speaker noted, actually we're very involved in electric mobility. We run a regional platform on electric mobility. But at the end of the day, we're a bank that finances projects. We do a lot of work in transport and increasingly in electric mobility. Myself, I've worked with electric mobility since 2009. Came across Dr. Kim in University of Ulsan when I was at the International Energy Agency, so worked closely with Korea as a leader in electric mobility. And today with EBRD, happy to say that Korea supports a lot of our work in electric mobility, including, for example, a study trip to Korea with clients from our different countries. So I'll give you a bit of an update of EBRD, what we're doing, but then also a bit about the market, and then happy to take questions. Next slide, please. So EBRD, very briefly, is a development bank like ADB or World Bank and so on. It's based in London. It has the name European, so it can be confusing, but these are the countries we operate in. You can see it's very much former Soviet bloc, Eastern Europe, expanded to Caucasus, Central Asia, and Mongolia, North Africa. And you can see we go from Morocco to Mongolia, but these are the countries we work in. The yellow dots are investments in battery electric, so mostly battery electric buses. We've done 2 battery electric taxi projects, and more we're doing battery electric trolley buses. A lot of our countries have overhead lines, so it makes a lot of sense to keep using that infrastructure. So we use trolley buses or support trolley buses with adding small batteries, so-called in-motion charging, similar to hybrid vehicles, which allows for autonomous range for 20 kilometers. So you can decouple the overhead pantograph, as it's called. The green dots are network electric. Those are more classic metro systems and regular trolley buses. No less important, but I think today we're talking more the yellow dots, so to speak. And red dots, charging infrastructure, is very tough to finance because you have to rely on projections of users for 10, 20 years. So it's very risky. But as a development bank, we're actively trying to sign these deals and support charging infrastructure. Next slide. A lot to read here. I will only say that EBRD supports electric mobility across the whole ecosystem. So on the left side, you can see e-mobility services, which are things like fleets, private fleets, public transport. We're seeing interest in, for example, postal fleets, which is interesting. In the middle one, we have policy and strategy. So we try to pull together some support for strategies. In many countries, the first step is to have an electric mobility strategy, because maybe they're not ready in terms of regulations and so on. This is where Korea, for example, and others support a lot of our work. And then on the right, supply chain. We want the electricity to be green, and we also want to support countries to have the whole, as much as they can, of supply chain and value, so that they're not just importing electric vehicles, but they're also participating. Next slide. Here's again a bit the ecosystem approach. So on electric buses, which is what we focus on a lot, we invest, but we don't want to just leave these buses there and hope things go well. We work closely with our cities and clients, public and private, to make sure the supportive policies are there, bring the private sector. Sometimes we do this with workshops and support. We did an electric bus paper, which I'd encourage you to download. I can also share it later. We also have something called the Green Cities Program, which is the flagship program of the bank, working across 60 cities, mobilizing over $8 billion in investment. And it's a really exciting program to try to work directly with cities and invest in cities and with cities. Next slide. So if we turn a little bit to market, I'm sure you've seen these kind of graphs. I used to work at IEA, so I was guilty of producing them. This is electric car stock, not sales, but stock. And just to say, there's a long way to go, but certainly the growth is very quick. China, of course, is leading electrification with about half of all EV car sales on the planet, and Europe is the second biggest market. Next slide, please. Here's an interesting one, which we've spent a lot of time talking about, but I will not. I'll just say briefly, resale values is interesting because there's been, let's say, fleet owners are wary to invest in electric vehicles because they don't know what the second-hand value is, because they're new products. They haven't been on the market that much. Also, I think I don't need to tell you, the difference between an electric car in 2010, 2015, and 2020 is quite a lot. So it makes sense that resale values would be less than, for example, a diesel car, which more or less has been the same for the last 10 years. Interestingly though, recently these values are starting to converge, come together, and that might be the beginning of a trend where people are starting to feel a bit more comfortable with electric vehicles and what they can sell them for in the second-hand market, which is just developing even in Europe. Next slide, please. An interesting development, this is for EU plus UK. These are shares of urban buses, and it's interesting because for the first time ever, electric buses became the top-selling technology, which is the first time for any segment in modern history, I should say. Maybe 100 years ago, things were a bit different, but this is a really interesting development. A lot of it comes from EU phasing out diesel buses. So you can see diesel is crashing there, so to speak, and battery electric is taking off. China still accounts for 80% of global electric bus sales, but in Europe you see e-bus sales reach 30% sales. So it's quite interesting. The upfront cost is a lot, total cost of ownership can be better, especially with the fuel prices make it so, and the ranges are improving. We feel more comfortable now supporting electric buses which have ranges of 300-400 kilometers and more than maybe 10 years ago when they simply didn't have the range. Next slide. Also an interesting segment are light commercial vehicles. So we have a Korea here to the right, and this is, for example, delivery vans. So I don't know if you've seen them yourselves, but here in London you can see a lot of the fleet owners are starting to move to electric, partly because there's pretty good charging infrastructure in London, and there's a lot of incentives, and finally the prices are coming down. The golden rule of energy efficiency is, of course, that the more you use it, the faster the payback is, and fleet owners who use it commercially for deliveries use them a lot. So because they're more energy efficient, they see their payback periods looking a lot better. Next slide. Battery prices, also I think you're probably quite familiar with this. Very good trends coming down. There was a bit of an increase actually for the first time last year. This seems to have continued in 2023, seems to be coming down still. That had to do a bit with different supply chains, and we can talk a bit more about batteries, but simply to say the trend has been very good. Efficiency has come up, prices have come down, so these, it's very helpful for deployment. Next slide. This is interesting, just wanted to share a bit. There's a lot here we could also talk about, but simply the demand for batteries will grow 10 times from 2020 to 2030, which is largely driven by battery electric vehicles. There's also some interest in stationary storage and other types of batteries, e-buses, consumer electronics and so on, but certainly battery electric vehicles will be what's leading this. And this is interesting for different battery energy storage systems, different types of business models and so on, and I can show you some examples of that shortly. Next slide. Same kind of graph, but simply to say, this is from METI in Japan, analysis by them, but to show the global storage battery market for vehicles is going to go 14.2 times between 2020 and 2035. And stationary is going to 4.3, which is also quite a remarkable number. So batteries have a big role to play for the energy sector to allow for load balancing, grid balancing, and storage of renewable energy, so we can use it when we need it. Next slide. This is a bit interesting. It's a cumulative venture capital in electric mobility. And what's interesting here is you have different types of segments, electric road transport and batteries, and then you have who's investing in what. So venture capital, EBRD, although we're a development bank, classic in some ways, we also have an equity division, we also do venture capital, smaller shares than loans, but nevertheless, we work in this space, and you can see it's a very interesting field. United States clearly is the land of venture capital, but not necessarily for all segments. You see for car makers, China takes the lead. For 2- and 3-wheelers, it's actually India. And for battery recycling, it's the biggest one, where the rest of the world plays a role. So it's a quite interesting picture to just get a feel for where the early investments are going. Next slide. Again, we don't have to go so far into batteries and so on, but given how important it is, it's half the price of the car. There's a lot of politics behind it, supply chain issues. It's certainly worth mentioning a little more. Cathodes, I think potentially are the biggest proportion of battery costs. So in a classic lithium-ion battery, the cathode, anode, electrolyte, and separator. But things are shifting, both in terms of how much material is being used and the different chemistries. Next slide. So you see here the battery supply chain. China, as I mentioned, dominates a lot of the downstream supply chain as well as upstream. The acronyms there are lithium, nickel, cobalt, and graphite. Should have added that, sorry. But you can see here, there's different parts of it. EBRD is active in all. We do mining, we do recycling, and everything in between. And I think there's not a day goes by without you read a news article about different countries wanting to build up their EV value chain. And you can see kind of what the different segments are here. Next slide. As I mentioned, though, batteries themselves are shifting a lot. So if you look at the left graph, you can see here different types of battery chemistries and how much that shifted. So in 2015, you'd see a lot more NMC batteries. And now in 2035, projections are NMC as well, but different types of NMC batteries, different compositions. On the right, for example, you can see cobalt and nickel seem to be coming down because of how the battery industry is shifting. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. Next slide. So here you can see a bit of things that are how, I summarized a bit how they're shifting. So as I said, NMC batteries reduce demand for cobalt, but increase demand for nickel. LFP, demand for nickel and cobalt, but increases for lithium. Sodium ion, I think Korea and Japan and a few others are quite ahead on that, and that's very exciting to see if that comes to market. Not as good energy density, but still could be more durable, maybe safer. Replacing graphite and silicone is also another option. So I think if I can send one message, it's that prices are coming down for batteries, energy density is coming up, and things are shifting a lot in terms of what materials. So when people ask me a question, what about China, what about supply chain, etc., I have to give the unsatisfying answer that it depends, because so many things are shifting right now. And mostly it's good to have diversity of options. The battery for your cell phone should not be the same battery for a large electric bus, obviously. So maybe it's good that we're seeing a bit different types of chemistries for different types of use cases. Electric 2 and 3-wheelers, even heavy-duty trucks are coming on the market, and they require different batteries. Next slide. Here, since sitting in Europe or UK, I just wanted to give a very kind of quick overview of EU regulations. The EU is driving a lot of changes in the global battery market, so it's worth, let's say, following what the EU is doing. These are the parts in red. I just wanted to show a bit different laws that are have come into place. And that, shall we say, push the battery market to be more efficient in terms of recycling, very strategic about which raw materials they use, and also on the right there you can see grid operators need to take energy storage facilities into account when they do network plans. So batteries are only going to become more important. They're going to be recycled more, they're going to be used as energy storage more, and of course they're going to be used more in electric vehicles. A big question, which I can't answer, but is an interesting question, is whether or not the EU will end up exporting used batteries or recycling them and using them themselves. I think that'll be quite interesting to see how that goes. Next slide. Again, not going to bore you with different types of articles, but just one in there, Articles 56, 57 of the 2023 battery regulation. And let me just, I should have started with a very important battery regulation was put into place this summer in the EU, and it had many, many big changes and many, let's say, procurement specifications had to be updated. One thing that's interesting is this extended producer responsibility, which is the principle that the one who's manufacturing the battery also needs to provide a solution for taking it back. And that's something we haven't really seen that much in the EV battery space yet. And there at the bottom, you see that from February 2027, all batteries need to have an electronic record, a so-called battery passport, which is accessible via QR code. This means that all supply chain analyses, all procurement concerns and so on, it should be very straightforward to simply scan the battery and understand where all the parts of the battery came from. Because a battery is a complex thing with many different minerals and chemistry, different chemistry setup, meaning that it's just hard to trace back where the different parts of the battery came from. You might know who assembled it, you might know who made the cathode, but where did the materials come from that cathode and so on. So that's going to be quite an interesting change. Next slide. Same thing, but just over a timeline, and the overall message here is just to say that things are shifting, and the demands for increasing recycling efficiencies will only go up. Next slide. If you go to the next slide. There we go. So here's two exciting examples I wanted to show that I work a lot on electric buses, but not only. We are doing our first electric bus plus solar PV project, which we work in, for example, the Middle East. It seems quite obvious, but it needs to make financial sense. One thing that makes it quite interesting is to add a battery to it. So you have a bus, the solar PV, and a battery. If you do that, you have your own kind of ecosystem in a sense. And when you work in countries which are very unstable grids, like Lebanon, for example, it becomes quite interesting to consider this kind of business model. Zenobi is a company here in London, which has, as you see, 4,000 electric buses and trucks and commercial vehicles. And they have several depots where they have these stationary batteries, which help provide some electricity to the buses, but also they make money through load balancing and helping the grid be stable. Volvo is doing something similar there on the right, and Volvo is quite a leader in trucks, electric trucks also. So the two of them, these are two quite interesting examples, I think, that we're trying to engage with our clients to see if they're interested. Next slide. So this is to wrap up and to summarize. So from an U&E perspective and our work, there's some success factors in the way forward. One is to bring in the energy sector at the outset. I would say the number one issue I've seen since I worked on electric mobility since 2009 is whether you work at a national level, an urban level, or a project level. If you don't bring in the energy sector at the outset, from the beginning, you run into issues. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen projects that almost were good, but they simply forgot about upgrading the grid or having the right transformers and so on. And it's just, or it takes 2 to 3 years to, let's say, connect the bus depot to the grid. You know, these are really big issues, and it would be very helpful to always make sure transport and energy work closer together. On frameworks, so one potential way to do this is to use frameworks as opportunities. Frameworks, I mean, for example, sustainable urban mobility plans or green city action plans like we do at EBRD. We can call them frameworks or strategies or simply platforms like the one that was mentioned by the speaker before me. The idea is simply that we can use these to foster cross-sector dialogue. And by which I mean electric mobility is complicated because it's not just land use planning, public transport planning, energy sector, it's all those and more. And to get them to work together is always hard. But sometimes with these kind of frameworks or platforms, there's an opportunity because everyone's in the same room, so to speak, and you can take advantage of that. And then the one on the right, electric mobility versus electric vehicles. The idea here is that we think about it as an ecosystem. We're not trying to replace one vehicle with another and be done. A green traffic jam is still a traffic jam, as I think it was someone in Barcelona said. The point being is that, sure, vehicle electrification is helpful, and it's a great tool for sustainable development, but if we're looking at cities and so on, especially congested cities, we want to support walking, cycling, and public transit as much as possible, and then for remaining vehicles, turn to electrification. And then on the bullets there, as I said, emerging trends in electric mobility are increasing efficiency and decreasing battery costs, but often it's not about the technology, it's about implementation, and that's where I think it's good to have these kind of discussions like we're having today. Government support for EV infrastructure is an essential step that can be taken today. You may have heard of the chicken and egg problem, which came first. And so for a lot of EV drivers, they don't want to buy an EV because there's no EV infrastructure. But the private sector doesn't want to invest in EV infrastructure if there's no drivers. So what do? Arguably, the government can support EV infrastructure in the first couple of years and then step away to let the private sector take over. This is what's happened in Norway, Netherlands, and other successful EV markets. And I think it's good to consider starting immediately. Does not even need to be hardware and investments. You can start with a strategy or regulations to make sure it's at least legal and easy or fast to install. And that step can be taken today. Multimodal electrification, simply to say that there's a lot of different types of electric mobility, from trains to e-scooters, etc., and to think about them together can be really helpful from energy planning. And then the final point there, incorporating smart city elements. At EBRD, we work a lot with digitalization, and we see that there's a lot of good overlap between digitalization and electric mobility. And the better one is doing, the better the other can do. So connecting the two is a really good strategy. Next slide. So I'll stop there and say thank you so much for your attention. And here's a delivery van outside my son's school around the corner here, just to show you that this is actually happening in practice. So thank you so much from my side.
Thank you. Please using this mic.
I'll turn up my sound a little bit.
Just a moment.
Sure.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Tali. I have one question about, I think the best way to accelerate the application of the electric vehicle is strengthen the collaboration between the stakeholders. How about the application of like a strategy application to strengthen the stakeholders collaboration that applied in the UK? Thank you, Mr. Tali.
Thank you so much for your question. Yeah, no, very good question, and I think that is a bit similar to what I was saying, is that using these frameworks and strategies to bring in different stakeholders is a great strategy. What is the best way to do it? To be honest, I don't know. There's a lot of different ways to do it, depending on countries and cities. Some countries are working a very, very top-down. If the president says something should happen, it happens, and people work together. But if we translate that into how is that useful, one thing I would say is it's very good to have a political champion, someone at the top, walking the walk and showing that this is serious, and to provide firm targets that the private sector can plan against. I think that's good to have at the top. But then in terms of stakeholders, as you say, again, I think there's no shortage there. Bringing in, for example, academia and the research community are incredibly important. When I worked at the IEA, I can't tell you how many times I really needed researchers and academia to help with a lot of the analysis, which makes sense because researchers in academia are looking at cutting edge questions, latest data points and so on. Whereas when you're working in finance and so on, you're using data points from 2005 and very old things that are just out of date. So I think bringing research in academia is a very good approach, and it hasn't been done enough yet, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Despite of the early morning, very nice.
Oh, and maybe, sorry if I can add one more thing. You did ask about UK specifically, so let me just say there's a really cool initiative here in the UK called the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles. And this is a cross-ministerial unit. So I don't think I've actually ever seen this. It's a permanent unit that sits across several ministries. And that's quite interesting. So someone from Ministry of Finance, someone from Ministry of Planning, Transport, and Energy are all in one unit, but across different ministries. And that, I think, is probably what's helped the UK do a lot of good things that require different stakeholders to be involved. So that could be something to also consider.
Thank you. Thank you. In spite of the early morning, please, thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful presentation and cooperation. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.